Joining us now to talk about this insanity, as the insanity continues, is the president of the great organization Judicial Watch, President Tom Fitton. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Great, Steve. Thanks for having me on again. Good to be with you.
Well, it's my pleasure. But, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, according to the Defense Department or Department of Defense training documents, our founding fathers are extremists and belong basically to hate groups.
That's right. There's a student guide entitled Extremism that we pulled out using the Freedom of Information Act from an agency called the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, which is a Defense Department agency, and they're training students, evidently, on extremism. And they just talk about extremist movements and extremist ideologies, and specifically the document states, in U.S. history, there are many examples of extremist ideologies and movements. The colonists who sought to free themselves from British rule and the Confederate states who sought to succeed from the northern states are just two examples. And later in that same section, the document lists the 9/11 attack under a category of historical events. So, believe it or not, there's someone in our military sending out training material that, in the same breath, lists our Revolutionary War and 9/11 as being kind of historical equivalents.
I have no doubt that our president believes all this.
Right.
I just don't understand how it gets, I guess, his appointments. I mean, how does this happen is what I'm trying to figure out. I'm not shocked by it, but how does it happen? How does it get in there? Who puts it in there?
Well, let's a little more context. Another statement says, now, instead of dressing in sheets or publicly espousing hate messages, many extremists will talk of individual liberties, states' rights, and how to make the world a better place. What does that sound to you like? It sounds to me like the IRS guidelines for attacking Tea Party groups.
I was just going to say, that's a definition of the Tea Party and how the left views the Tea Party.
And there's this organization called the Southern Poverty Law Center that used to go after the KKK and the neo-Nazis, but I guess there wasn't enough business on that end of the political spectrum, so they started tarring and feathering conservative groups like the Family Research Council and Concerned Women for America with the title hate group. And they specialize in calling conservatives hate groups, and sure enough, the SPLC's fingerprints are all over this document in that their reference is a guide. And if you're a member of a hate group or an extremist, according to this document, they don't want you in the military.
Yeah.
So the founding fathers wouldn't be welcome in today's military looking at this paper.
And of course, let's pick up on the Southern Poverty Law Center, which you described so properly. I mean, we know, and of course this would be a huge media story if it were the other way around, but it never got any traction at all. We know that the shooter who went to the Family Research Council's offices and was heroically stopped by a security guard who got shot, this guy had a gun, and he told the FBI, because I've played the tape, that he found the Family Research Council on the website of the Southern Poverty Law Center, who had a hate group map, if you will, and that's how he came to that organization. And he was told on that site they hated gays, and he went to shoot them up.
Well, that's right. The SPLC irresponsibly labels these groups as hate groups. And that's bad enough. It led arguably to violence and almost a mass murder, but for the heroics of that security guard, as you point out. But on top of that, now the SPLC has really privileged access to the Department of Justice, law enforcement agencies in states, and now our military, it looks like. And, it's one thing to have this far-left crank organization going around smearing conservatives. It's another thing to have their work being incorporated into training materials for our nation's military.
Well, I'm afraid to say that I believe groups such as CARE and others, the FBI is now reading from their PR or doctrine into their training manuals and how to conduct interviews with suspected terrorists. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised.
In today's military, you can't say jihad, but you can pretend that the founding fathers were extremists, and in the same breath tie them to the KKK and Al Qaeda.
Well, I want to also elaborate here. We're talking to Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here on the Steve Malzberg Show about this outrageous development. But as you pointed out on Fox News, I believe that the military is becoming more and more of an unwelcoming place for Christians.
Well, these efforts to tamp down on the expression of Christian thought and talking Christian ways of thinking in the workplace as it is in the military. And our chaplains are under fire, and if you have a traditionalist view of Christianity or traditional Christian worldview, it looks to me that you're unwelcome in today's military, or there are statements that would suggest that you'd be unwelcome in today's military. I tell you, when you look at this document, and your listeners need to go to our website and get the document.
Judicialwatch.com?
Judicialwatch.org.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Judicialwatch.org.
Yeah.
It's only a few pages long. And we're just scratching the surface because it is 10 or 12 pages of pure craziness. They have the 7 stages of hate, 16 extremist traits. We don't want neo-Nazis in the military. We don't want people like Major Hassan in the military. And certainly effective management would prevent that, and human resources and recruitment would prevent that from happening. But instead, they have to go to this political extreme and tar everyone that potentially, and if you're a leftist or a rightist, you probably shouldn't like this, because depending on your point of view, anyone can be labeled an extremist and unfit for military service.
Right, but they don't. But as you well know, Tom, they don't really care about the left extreme. Now, let me just point out. So we have the trashing of our founding fathers, and putting them up to to hate groups and extremists and radicals, etc. Excuse me. We have what we've already talked about with regard to being on the lookout, but we have an example. One prominent example is Nidal Hassan. Now, this email that Fox News obtained, sent by a lieutenant colonel at Fort Campbell to 36 subordinates, warning them to be on the lookout for any soldiers who might be members of, quote, domestic hate groups like the FRC and the American Family Association. Yet we had warning after warning after warning after warning about Hassan. And still to this day, the military will not acknowledge, and the president will not acknowledge, and the administration will not acknowledge that that was an act of jihad when the guy himself says it was an act of jihad. So we have this horrific double standard. Be on the lookout for groups that, you might think are on the right, but if a Muslim radical extremist jihadist is out there spewing his hate and his jihadism, just, don't say anything.
Well, there's this fantasy on the left, and in many ways it's a purposeful misleading of the American people that we're just 2 steps away from a military coup by Christian white racists, and we have to cleanse the military of this way of thinking, and it's a fantasy land that the left lives in. You saw it with President Clinton and tying Oklahoma City to Rush Limbaugh. You see it with this new document tying either the KKK to the statements about individual liberties and states' rights, and it's a big lie, but also it's a fantasy as well, if they do actually believe it. And our military is being distracted from the true threats. As I said, you can't say jihad, but you can tie the founding fathers and pretend they're members of the KKK or the moral equivalent of them.
Insane. All right, judicialwatch.org, folks. Read the documents. You have to see them. And Tom, is always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. My pleasure. Tom Fitton, ladies and gentlemen, president of Judicial Watch. This is where our country is right now. And if you think our country's changed in the last